While we have been searching for ways to encourage others, you may be thinking, who is there to encourage me during these difficult days? Good morning, I'm Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Friday. You know, when we are discouraged and disheartened by the circumstances of our life, or perhaps we have doubts and fears about the future, there may be no one to turn to encourage or exhort us. But we can find an example of King David in 1 Samuel chapter 30 that may help us out. David and his army of fighting men had gathered for battle with Achish, but the Philistines didn't trust them, so they sent them home to Ziklag to their families. Now the problem is, when they got back to Ziklag, they found their city had been attacked, ransacked by the Amalekites. They had taken away their wives and their children and all of their belongings with them. And David and his men were so distraught and even faint from their travels back to home. Apparently, they blamed David for this and all the trouble that they saw here, and they sought to stone him. So he could find no comfort from his fellow soldiers. Certainly, his wives and his children were all gone, taken captive. So the Bible tells us in 1 Samuel chapter 30 and verse 6, David was greatly distressed, for the people thought of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Now, this had to be a distressing time to realize that when they had come home for comfort from the battlefield, they found only destruction and their families missing. So David found the only place to turn for encouragement was to the Lord. The Bible says he encouraged himself in the Lord. After all, you realize David was the young psalmist who had written such things as, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Or Psalm 46 where he says, "God is our fortress and everlasting help in time of trouble." So in his comforting, he realized the Lord's great strength in our distress. He even called for the priest to bring him the ephod. This was a garment that they used oftentimes to find out the will of the Lord and for the Lord to speak to the priest and to his people. And apparently the Lord encouraged him to go after the Amalekites to return all that they had taken from them. So his weary soldiers gathered themselves together and began to chase after the Amalekite army. God stepped in several ways, bringing them a servant from the Amalekites that helped to guide them, and he directed them in this path and certainly gave them the victory. The Bible says, surely enough, they found their families and all the spoil of the war that the Amalekites had taken from them. And the Bible records that the men fought from sundown of one day to the evening of the next day in order to overcome them, and none of them escaped. A few that were on camels. And when they got out of the battles, they returned to their families, and they had all of their belongings. You see, they also got all the spoil that the Amalekites had stolen in other places in their rampage and in their battles and travels. But what David got from this experience was so much more than that. David got the knowledge, the realization that God is faithful. At times when we need encouragement, he is there. At times when no one else can help us, God can. And we need to learn to trust him in the days whenever we need encouragement.